From political correctness on college campuses to it being forced by the government. Would you believe people are being sued by AGs, attorneys general, for, well, having a different opinion about climate change? From the Washington Times, Valerie Richardson, glad to have you. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. And
from the Independence Institute, that rather untrustworthy organization, Simon Lomax, who works on energy issues. Thanks for being here. All right, I tell you what. Why don't you set up the punchline here for us?
Okay.
There has been a raging debate on climate change.
Yep.
How much is man-made? How bad is it? This and that. And so some attorneys general from different states decided it's time to get to those climate change skeptics. What did they do?
Right. Let me start with the bad news. So the bad news is there's a group of Democratic attorneys general at the state level who have basically decided they want to use their law enforcement powers to go after people who disagree with the Obama climate agenda, and especially the Clean Power Plan. So they basically, their legal theory is that if you disagree with them on climate change, that's fraud, and therefore the First Amendment no longer applies to you.
Let me make sure I got this very clear. You disagree with the climate change, you're not wrong.
Right.
You're fraudulent.
You're fraudulent.
You're fraudulent.
That's right.
There's no, it's not like, yeah, let's argue this, no, you're fraudulent and you need to be brought to justice.
Right. Therefore, they can subpoena you, they can demand you turn over documents, emails, phone records, all that kind of thing. So that's the bad news. Now, the good news is that this effort is really kind of falling apart. It's not going the way they hoped.
That's bad news. I want this to keep going because this is hysterical. So, again, this is not, just make sure people understand, this is not, some people say what you're saying about climate change is wrong and we're taking a civil suit against you. This is the government. These are attorneys general from how many states?
16 states and the Virgin Islands.
16 states?
16 states.
All right. And who are they taking to task?
They are focusing primarily on ExxonMobil and ExxonMobil's supporters in the academic community, universities, think tanks, professors, people who have in the past raised doubts about the extent and causes of climate change. The so-called deniers. And the Virgin Islands Attorney General, who has been the most aggressive, he issued 3 subpoenas, 2 to ExxonMobil, 2 to the Competitive Enterprise Institute, and 1 to ExxonMobil. He's had to retract all 3 of them because both the Competitive Enterprise Institute and ExxonMobil filed a motion saying, this is ridiculous. This is a violation of our First Amendment rights. You can't use your prosecutorial power to come after us for an opinion that we hold. And he has since entered into agreements with both of them to drop his subpoenas.
And you mentioned the Competitive Enterprise Institute, which is a sister organization of the Independence Institute, which I run, and we've worked with them pretty closely on this. What other think tanks were subpoenaed?
In the Virgin Islands subpoena, you had 100 universities, think tanks, academics subpoenaed. I mean, there were 50 or 60 think tanks, free market think tanks. American Enterprise Institute. I mean, big think tanks, Cato Institute, Heritage Foundation.
And a lot of state-based think tanks as well. Which
right.
All right. The punchline I'm getting to on this is they took think tanks that have relationships with the Competitive Enterprise Institute. We've worked together with them on issues. We share talent sometimes. We were not mentioned, but which think tank was mentioned?
The Independent Institute in Oakland, California was mentioned. And there is some question as to whether or not they meant to mention the Independence Institute, which does more energy work than the Independent
Let me make
Institute.
it really clear. What makes this so wonderfully delicious is I have no doubt that they meant to subpoena us, along with some of other sister think tanks. Right. The think tank called Independent, not Independence Institute, is a publishing house, great organization out in Oakland, but this is not one of their driving issues the way that we have done lawsuits, that we have done legal actions, that we have done work against the climate change plan. They meant to do us. They are so damn sloppy, they didn't know the difference between the Independence Institute and the Independent Institute, and damn it, AGs, here I am. I've been subpoenaed many times. Bring it on. Are you really that sloppy?
Well, they apparently took their list of think tanks, universities, academics from a post on the Greenpeace website. Greenpeace has a long list of what they called, climate deniers, and that list that list appears almost word for word in the subpoena in terms of it's the same order, it's the same organizations. It looks like the whole thing basically got copied and placed into the subpoena.
So wait a minute, these guys were so sloppy that they went to Greenpeace's website, cut and paste from here over to here. We're subpoenaing these guys.
That's what appears to have happened, because it's virtually the same order and it's the same organizations. So it looks like they took their list of people that were going to subpoena from Greenpeace. Well, apparently Greenpeace
all right,
didn't have you guys.
Then I take it all back, Attorneys General. It's not your fault. The people you copied it from got our name wrong. It's independence, as in declaration of independence, not independent like the political party. All right. Where is this leaving us now?
Where it leaves us now is that this effort is really not going the way that they planned. They've had to pull down a subpoena that really was going after all of these different groups and people in the energy sector. And what's happened is, almost out of the gate, this thing really kind of got started late last year. Right out of the gate, you had people on the right and on the left saying this is a terrible idea. This is undermining the First Amendment. This sets a dangerous precedent, a terrible precedent. And when you have people on the left and people on the right agreeing about this, it tells you something, and that is people may disagree about what causes climate change and what the best way to respond to climate change is, but almost everybody agrees that the First Amendment is a terrific thing, free speech is a great thing, and that the government shouldn't be coming after you, law enforcement shouldn't be coming after you just because you disagree with the government about climate change.
So our first segment was about the bias response team at government universities, notably UNC, going after people and using their power. This is even more troublesome, which is we don't like what you're saying politically. We're going to have the Attorney General sue you and call what you're saying fraudulent. We will be the police of this. I would imagine good people on the left, the ACLU and others who go, wait a second, a republic, a democracy doesn't work unless you can have free flow of exchange of ideas, because while those AGs might be liberal Democrats, there could be conservative ones. And are you ready for President Trump's Attorney General to start going after people and calling that fraudulent? Because that's exactly what you're asking for, and this is the precedent.
All right,
Am I off on this?
That exact point was raised in a letter by 13 Republican Attorneys General in response to this effort. They wrote a letter to the 17 AGs saying, if you can prosecute and go after for fraud people who disagree with you on climate change because they don't think it's as serious you say, then you can also go after people who exaggerate climate change, people who say it's more serious than perhaps you think it is.
Are there any examples of this?
Well, you have obviously a lot of climate models out there that have been disproven over the years as having been inaccurate. There are any number of statements out there of people who have said certain areas would be undersea by now and certain temperatures would be over the top by now. And if you could go after
So the question is, were they wrong? Or were they fraudulent?
Right. If
they were fraudulent, is it a crime?
That is the question. And the Republicans AGs raised this and said, look, look at the precedent you're setting, because if you're going to prosecute one side, that's going to open it up for the other side to be prosecuted. And these are basically, as far as they can say, what they're saying is difference of opinions, not facts. But
and that's why we have this incredible dialogue,
right?
Particularly in the private sector. And really, what you're talking about here is the private sector.
But the Democratic AGs will argue that the science is settled. We know what's happening with climate change. We know the extent of it. We know the causes, and the people who disagree are perpetrating a fraud on consumers. I'm
thinking about the science being settled. I love the term of that. One of my favorite photographs in history is from I think it's the 1917 Tour de France. Tour de France. And all these guys are on bicycles, and they're about ready to take the biggest hill of the race of the day. Each and every one of them has a cigarette in his mouth. Why? Because the science was settled that the tobacco smoke would help open up your lungs to get more oxygen in for you to take the big hill. You remember the dietary pyramid we had as kids. Number one was grains and carbs,
right.
And now we realize, no, that is completely upside down.
Right.
But the science was settled. And the idea that the AGs know what the science is
it's not, and
crazy.
it's not about and it's not about science, John. It's not about science. It's about politics. If you look at the people who are sort of behind this investigation, the people who've been lobbying the Democratic AGs to get involved, they are big anti-fossil fuel interests, big foundations that fund.
Like what?
Like the Rockefeller family. They're the biggest, some of the biggest funders of anti-fossil fuel activism in the country. They paid for the activism that lobbied the AGs to do this. They paid for the activists who came up with the legal strategy that the AGs are using, and they even paid for non-profit media outlets to publish articles that the AGs are citing as proof that there was fraud, and thereby justifying the whole investigation. So there's this echo chamber, this political echo chamber, funded by the far left of the environmental movement, that is really behind all of it. And it's not about science at all. It's about politics, and it's about defending a federal climate agenda that's being pushed by one side of the political aisle. And that's fine. They can believe that. They can support that. The First Amendment gives them the freedom to do that. But the First Amendment also gives people the freedom to disagree with it and petition their government to do something about it.
I remember the good old days when the left liked the First Amendment. Maybe I'm crossing it. All right, just a few seconds left. Where does this go?
Right now, it's on its heels because the Virgin Islands AG had to pull his subpoenas, and so you've got an active investigation now in New York, Massachusetts, and California. But we'll see what
Valerie,
happens.
thank you. Simon, thank you. Listen for me on KHOW Radio. Tell a friend about the Independence Institute, independenceinstitute.org, and we'll see you next week.